This video is going to discuss how we can annotate drill holes just to show what's in them in a visual way, also add some labels to them. And we are going to be focusing on these commands shown here. So we'll be defining the strata and the beds. We're going to draw some geologic columns, kind of in a side view, and then we're going to just put some simple labels on the drill hole symbols themselves. So first off, I'm going to want to start this define strata bed command. What this command does is it's going to control a lot of the visuals when we actually draw the drill holes in a side view. So I'm going to start with this. Opens up kind of a blank spreadsheet view. It should be empty to start with. If there's anything left in here, if you're working on a new project, you might want to clear that out just to start fresh. So what I'm going to need to do is add all of my strata and bed layers, one for each row, but rather than enter them in one at a time, I'm just going to click read drill holes and pull all the information in from the holes. Now I do get a prompt down here asking if I want to process the beds. For now I'm just going to say no. And we can see that's going to bring in all of the different strata names. Now it is going to be important to also define our beds. So I'm going to read the drill holes once more. This time I'll say yes, I want to process the beds. And notice that it added 2 more rows. So I've got the C2 strata and I've got the parting strata, but both of those layers were actually part of the C2 bed. I'm going to talk some more on these later, but for now we're just going to leave those in there as is. So we've got all the layers defined. These are strata bed names you're going to pull straight from what's in the drill hole. If you want to change the full names, for example, if I want to type out the word overburden, coal 1, coal 2, things like that, you're welcome to do that. Most of the time this column is what's going to get used for labels, but some commands also give you the option to use this column for labeling. Another thing to mention, if there's some columns on here that you can't see, you can come down here to column options and just turn these on or off as needed. I generally like to leave them all on and then just ignore the ones I don't really care about for the application. I'll spend a few minutes talking about some of these other columns here because these can really come in handy. The key non-key status should have been read in automatically, just keeping track of what's key and what's waste material. The recovery percentage, that's going to come in handy when we're doing volume reserve calculations. These are all going to default to 100%, but I can change those by strata. If, for example, I was only going to recover 90% of coal 1, I could enter that in here. We'll just leave those at 100. The next column is the color. So color management is going to be very important when we're wanting to make a nice visual map. Now, to edit a color, you can just double click inside one of these cells and it'll open the AutoCAD color book. These are all going to default to be a white or a black color, just depending on your background. Now personally, I'm not a fan of setting an exact color because I really like using the by layer option. So if I labeled or drew a few holes and I set everything to a red color, it's much easier for me to change a layer color than it is to go back, select all those hatches, all those labels, pick them and change the color individually. So I end up using by layer for all of my colors and then set the colors in the layer properties manager. So I'll say OK there. Now if I want to change those color options for all of these, I can actually highlight all of them and click Edit Multiple. And I'm going to change the color for all of them, and I'm going to set them all to by layer. Now we don't actually see anything change in the preview here because white and by layer use the same color preview, but I know that those are all set now. The next thing I can do is change the hatch pattern. So if I click Edit on the hatch here, it opens up a larger dialog specific to that one strata name. So this is actually all of the options I saw in the spreadsheet related to overburden, but I'm just seeing them in one more visual dialog. And to set the hatch pattern, I can see the preview of the one that's already set for me. And by default, all of the non-key material is going to use this ANSI 31 pattern, so just the hatch line or the diagonal lines there, whereas key material is going to use a solid fill. If I want to change this up, I can hit select pattern, and I can see I've got quite a few options to pick from. I can look through the different pages here by hitting next, and I can just pick the one that I like. So for my overburden, I might use this grate, for example. Pick that. And I'll just say OK there. And I can do the same thing for all these other layers. So I'll stick with a lot of those defaults. I'll just change it overburden. Now the hatch scale actually controls the size of the hatch pattern. So if I'm looking back at this hatch pattern, if I use a scale of 25 as opposed to a scale of 100, it's just going to determine if these little rectangles show up smaller or larger. And honestly, one of the best things to do with that is to draw it out, see what the scale looks like. If you're not happy with it, you can always come back and change it. But I'm just going to stick with the default hatch scale of 25. The hatch degrees, you can actually rotate the hatch patterns, but I usually don't do that. I'll leave it with the default. Now the next column here is the density. So I mentioned in a previous video that we could define the density in the drill hole configuration file, but this is what I'll say is probably the most common way to define your densities, because you can change the density for each individual strata layer. So again, these are going to be defined in pounds per cubic foot. So I can just enter in whatever values I want to. And I might say a little bit heavier on that one. Parting, I'll use a 40. And use that as well. So it's very simple to enter those in. Next thing is the layer. Now layer management, very, very important when using CAD, just for keeping things organized. The layer name is going to default to the strata bed name. However, I like to go a bit further with this, and I actually like to put prefixes in here to group all these layers together in the layer property manager. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a prefix of geology space dash space, copy it with a Control-C, and then paste it in here. I can just hit Control-V there to paste it. And this just makes it a lot easier to keep all the layers grouped together, makes it easier to organize them. The next few columns that we have here are all related to conformance and some other settings with that. Used for modeling, we're pretty much always going to say yes because we want to model all these things, but the columns following that, use as seam marker, target strata, marker level, target of seam conformance, marker strata, all those things are related to the conformance options. I'm not going to be talking about those right now, but those can definitely come in handy for special cases when modeling. The next two columns, top split, bottom split. If we had a strata layer that's split into two child strata, we could define those here. Not necessary for this project, however. Lastly, I am going to draw everything in the legend. And just to show that, I'm going to come down here and hit Draw Legend. Notice that all of these are on. I'm going to use a legend size of 100. We can always scale that up or down. And there's that option to use the full name. So if I didn't want to see overburden, if I didn't want to see OVB C1, instead I wanted it to say overburden :1, I could turn on use full name. I'm going to leave it off for now and just say OK. I'm prompted to pick the legend position, so I'll pick a point somewhere here off to the side. Notice it draws them in. Everything currently uses this white color because I haven't changed the layer colors yet. But by clicking Draw Legend, actually putting that on there, it's going to generate all these layers for me. Now that's everything I really need to do with the strata definition file. So I'm just going to click Save As. store this in my settings subfolder. Just call this my strata definitions. I usually only have one of these per project. And I'll exit out. And now just to control the coloring on these layers, I'm going to go to my Layer Properties Manager, which if you need to get access to that on the AutoCAD Layers toolbar, you should have this icon here to open up the Layer Property Manager. And I can see here I have all of my geology layers. Notice the Layer Property Manager is going to organize these things alphabetically, so having a prefix of geology really comes in handy there. So all these layers have a white color, so this is a good opportunity for me to click on these and change them up however I want to see them. So I might use a red for my overburden, might use a slightly different shade, maybe an orange for the inner burden. My two coal layers, I'm actually going to use a definite black for those. Same thing for my C2 layer, C2 key layer that is. And for the parting layers, we're going to make those just, we'll do a shade of green. Of course, you can change those up as needed. So with those strata definition file settings, these are the colors that are going to be used when I actually draw the drill holes in a side view. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and actually draw the geologic columns. So if I go to my drill hole pull down menu, I can go down to draw geologic column. Now notice there is another command here for quick geologic column. That's more so just for simple inspection of the holes. But if I actually want to draw the holes in side view, this one has a lot of really good settings. So I'm going to start this up. And this dialog is broken into 3 separate tabs. Draw tells all the things that you actually want to include on the hole itself, basically how you want to process it. Grid controls an elevation axis or a x-axis if you're drawing multiple holes at a time. And then the label tab, of course, controls all the labels. I'm going to go through this command a few times. The first one we're going to do is going to be very, very simple, and then we'll do it a few other times just to add some extra options on there. So starting on the Draw tab, I have the Draw type, so I can draw the holes in 3D. I can draw them on 2D, which is probably the most common, or I can draw them directly next to the drill hole. This is kind of like drawing them in 2D, but instead of picking a location, it automatically draws the holes next to the drill hole symbol. I'm going to start off with this 2D option. For the horizontal alignment, I'm going to draw these individually, and the first time I'm just going to draw one hole. If I wanted to draw multiple holes, I could use line up or projected. Next, I have the column width scaler. So this is going to control basically the diameter of the hole as displayed on the screen. I generally like to stick with the 0.1. And as far as why this is called a scaler, I'll talk more on that in just a moment. You're going to see a lot of options on here referred to as scalers. So that'll come up in just a minute. To fill the drill hole, I'm going to use a hatch color as opposed to outlining or doing a solid fill. The hatch scaler, I always leave it a 1. Some of these other options I'm not going to discuss in depth. I'm not going to color the strata by a grade parameter file. The option to use a strata definition file. We did create that file, and there is a strata definition file now associated with this project. What this option does is it allows you to use a strata definition file other than the one associated with the project. For most applications, you do not need to use this because it's going to use the project strata definition file. So I'm going to leave that unchecked. And really all the other options on here, I'm not going to get too in-depth on these right now. I may talk more on some of those later. I'm going to move on to the next tab for grid. And this allows me to control what kind of axes I want to see on the holes. So right now I may want to draw a depth axis, and I'll go ahead and turn that on for right now. Now the next options on here, I have a horizontal scale and a vertical scale. So the horizontal scale controls the size of a lot of different things. Back on the Draw tab, where we refer to the column width scaler and set that to a 0.1, the way that actually controls the width of the column, it's this number multiplied by the horizontal scale. So 0.1 times 100 tells me that the drill hole would have a width of 10 AutoCAD units. So this horizontal scale is a very quick way to just change one number and everything else gets scaled appropriately or proportionally. For most applications, I just leave this on 100 and I make other changes to give a good result. So I'm going to leave that on 100. Now the vertical scale, this is what controls the vertical exaggeration. If the vertical scale is the exact same as the horizontal scale, then there's no vertical exaggeration. It's a 1-to-1. If the vertical scale is set to a 50, this would actually produce a 2x vertical exaggeration. So horizontal scale divided by vertical scale determines the vertical exaggeration. So the vertical scale of 25 would give a 4x vertical exaggeration. For most purposes, I like seeing those not exaggerated unless I have very shallow holes over a wide area, but I'll leave that as is. Next thing down, the y-axis grid interval. This is going to draw a tick mark on the depth axis every X number of feet. So if I wanted to see every 20 feet a tick mark, I can enter that in. And same thing for the label interval. I may only want to see that every 100 feet. It's not always apparent what numbers you need to enter in here. You do need to get a little more familiar with your data, so you might have to come back and change these numbers up. As for the axis text size scaler, I'm going to leave this with a 0.1. That'll give me a text height of 10 units. And I could also filter the range of values that I'm going to draw, or the range of the drill hole that I'm going to draw, but I'm going to leave both of those off for now. Lastly, I'm going to go to the Label tab, and to keep this very, very simple, I'm actually just going to turn all the labels off. We'll come back, talk more on these later, but I just want to draw a simple drill hole for now. With that, I'm going to click OK, and it tells me to select the drill holes that I want to draw. For right now, I'm just going to pick one drill hole. So I'll click on it, press enter, and it tells me to pick a location for the column. And I'm going to want to pick this somewhere off to the side so it doesn't overlap all my project. So I'll click a point there. You can see it comes in rather small. That's okay. I'll just zoom in on it. And we can see what I've entered in here. So it's drawn the drill hole itself. I've got the different strata layers. I don't have any labels on these strata because I turned off my labels, but I do see the depth axis. So just a very simple view of the hole. Now I'm going to do that again and just show how we can make some changes here. So for example, I might want to see a label every 20 feet. I may not want to just put the label every 100 feet. I am going to want to label each individual strata. The column width looks okay. I don't need to make it wider or more narrow. That's fine. And we'll just make those changes now. So we'll go back to Draw Geologic column. And let's go back to our grid. I'm going to say put a label every 20 feet. As for the Label tab, I do want to draw labels here. So I've got a couple categories of labels. I have a general label and a drill hole label. To show what the general label is, I'm going to click on General Label Settings. So here I can see I'm working with a lot of labels regarding the strata information. So this is going to tell me information such as the way that we're going to draw the labels. So do I want to use a standard piece of text? Do I want to use multi-line text? I'm going to use this in leader option. So this will actually draw a label for the strata name and then an arrow pointing to the section of the hole that it relates to. I can pick different label styles. We can see I've got that option there to use the full strata name as opposed to the abbreviated name. But I really don't end up making too many changes here. I'm just going to stick with these options and we'll move on to the next section. As for the label size, I'm going to use a 0.04. Using this is a 0.1 size for reference. My general label sizes are going to be a little bit smaller, and that's fine. Now comparing that to the drill hole labels, let's take a look at those settings. These are things that are attributes of the drill hole as a whole. I'm not talking about strata attributes, I'm talking about the drill hole attribute. So things like the drill hole name, the surface elevation, anything like that, water level. This is what we're talking about with the drill hole labels. So these are usually placed above the drill hole. And I'm going to keep it simple. I'm just going to draw the label, I'm just going to label the drill hole name. That's fine. Not making any other changes here. I'll click OK. That label I usually have a little bit bigger than my strata labels, maybe not as big as my axis labels. So a 0.08 will work fine. I am going to label the strata, and I can say if I want to label all the strata, just the selected or the key, I'm going to label all of them. And I'm going to put a bottom elevation label. I'm not going to label the depth, but I am going to label the thickness. A few other options here I couldn't work through. I'm not going to worry about labeling the bed right now. So with those changes, I'm going to click OK. Pick the drill hole again. Press enter. And I get an extra dialog this time. This is asking for additional strata attributes that I want to label. So I could pick the ash, the BTU. I could grab multiples by holding down the control key. Or I could hit clear to say I don't want to label any of those things. I'm going to click OK. And now I'll pick a location for the drill hole. Draw it right here. And there we can see we've got a little more information about the hole. I can see that this is drill hole C2. I'm seeing those depth labels on every 20 feet. I can see the strata name, the elevation, the thickness, a lot of extra information about the drill hole. So that's fine for drawing one hole at a time, but oftentimes we're going to want to draw multiple holes at a time. So for that, I'm going to repeat the command again. I'm going to do draw geologic column. Now I could draw multiple holes lined up in 2D, but first I want to show how we can draw these same types of holes next to the drill hole symbols. I'm going to use an offset distance of 1. It's fine. I can come back and change that later if I need to. And I'm not going to make any other changes right now. I'm just going to click OK. I'm going to pick the holes to label. I'll pick all of them. Press enter. I don't want to see the strata attributes labeled, but you can see what it does. It just puts all those drill holes in side view immediately next to the drill hole symbols. I'm actually going to undo because I don't generally like to keep all that drill hole illustration next to the symbol. So I'm just going to hit Control Z a few times and it gets rid of it. Now the next way that I'm going to draw these drill holes is I want to actually line them up. And to do that, I'm going to need to draw a cross-section line cutting through the drill hole symbols. So the first thing I'm going to do is make a new layer, and I like to just call this fence location. And I'll make that a red line so it's easy to see. And I'll make that my current layer. Now I'm just going to draw a polyline connecting up some of these drill holes. So draw 2D polyline. This is the Carlson 2D polyline command. I could also use the AutoCAD polyline command. So instead of 2DP, I could just type in PL into the command line. I'm not making any changes here. I'm just going to click OK. And I'm going to start connecting up these drill hole symbols. Now, I generally like to snap to the middle of the drill holes. If you don't want to be as exact with that, it's okay. You can be just a little bit off. But with my snaps active, making sure snaps are active down here, I'm just going to pick right in the middle of these drill holes. So now I have a fence location line on there. Now I'm going to repeat the draw geologic column command again. For the draw type, I'm going to go back to the 2D option, but I am going to need to make another change here. Instead of horizontal alignment set to individual, I'm going to project the drill holes onto that cross-section line. As for the vertical alignment, I always like leaving this set to elevation. Now if I go to the grid, I'm going to have a couple of extra options here. This time I don't necessarily want to see a depth axis, and I'm not going to draw this on an existing grid. This would mean if I already had a cross section through the geology drawn and I just wanted to add the drill holes onto it. But in this case, I don't have an existing grid to draw it on. So I'm going to uncheck that, and you can see I get a few other options on here. So this time I want to draw a elevation axis, and I also want to draw an x-axis. So basically show me the distances along this red line. So with those in place, I'm going to try using the same values for my grid and label interval. So I'm going to do 20 and 20. I may want to come back and change that later, but we'll just stick with that. And everything else should be the same. So this time I'm going to click OK. I'm going to pick the fence alignment polyline. So I'm going to pick the red line. So the first thing it asks is the maximum drill hole distance from the alignment polyline. So I had my fence line going straight through the middle of the holes. So this is really just a distance filter. Anything that's more than 50 foot away would not be drawn. So if I didn't get that line exactly in the middle of the holes, I've got a little bit of a tolerance here that I could use to still pick up those drill holes. I'm going to stick with 50 as the default. That's fine. But then it also asks me to pick the drill holes. So I've still got to actually do a window around the holes. So this is really just two different ways of filtering which of the holes are going to be drawn. So if for some reason I didn't want to draw this middle drill hole, I could deselect it and it wouldn't be drawn. But basically I want to pick up any of the drill holes within 50 foot of that line. So I'm just going to press enter. Again, it asks for the attributes. I'm not going to draw those now. I'm going to click OK. And pick my location down here. And there it draws those 3 drill holes as if they were projected onto that line. So essentially the same type of view, but now I've got multiple holes shown in there. Now I might want to turn some layers on and off or move some of these labels around to prevent the overlaps, but it should be a pretty simple exercise there. So that's just another way we can draw the drill holes. Now I'm going to show one last way to draw these drill holes, and that's going to be in 3D. So this time I'm going to go back to Draw Geologic Column, and this time I'm going to change the draw type to 3D. I am going to go to the grid and say I don't want to worry about drawing any of these axes. It's fine. And we're just going to click OK. Pick all the drill holes. Click OK. And if we zoom in, we're going to see some new information, some new circles showing around the holes. So to see that information, I'm going to hold down my Shift key and I'm going to pan the drawing. And I can see that the holes have now been drawn in 3D. Now right now my AutoCAD visual style is set to a wireframe, so that's not as pleasant to look at in 3D. So if I want to change that view, I'm just going to come down to the command line. I'm going to type in VS for visual style. And I can see I've got a lot of different options for how I want to display it. The ones that I prefer to jump back and forth between are the 2D wireframe, which is what we're looking at now, and the realistic option. So if I click on that, you'll notice it actually shades in the drill holes, and it's a lot more visually appealing. Now, I only like to use the realistic option when I'm actually viewing things. It's a little more graphics intensive to display things like this. And if I've got a lot of drill holes, that can really make a difference on the speed. So I do like to set this back to a 2D wireframe when I don't need to show that extra visual detail. Then I'll get back into the plan view. Quick way to do that, I can just go down to the view pull down, 3D view, plan view. Now I'm going to show one last option in drawing the geologic columns. First of all, I'm going back to draw these in 2D, and I'm just going to draw an individual hole to demonstrate the point. I am going to turn my depth axis back on. But back on the Draw tab, I want to use this option, Composite Strata to Beds. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK. I'm going to pick a drill hole to draw. I'll press Enter. Click OK. And I'm going to draw this one right in here. And we go ahead and move some of that information. Move these again. It's a little bit easier to see. Okay. So for a comparison, we've got a big difference between drawing these strata and drawing the beds. Notice when I'm drawing the strata, I can see the individual layers of coal too. I can see the parting. But when I draw the beds, I just see one layer of parting, one layer of key material, and the parting has actually been moved to the top of that group. Now to understand the way the program thinks about beds, I'm going to go into the help manual. I'm going to go into General Commands, Settings, and I'm going to look under Carlson Configure. This is a global set of program settings, some of them being mining settings, and there's some good visuals in here to help demonstrate some points. So I'm going to scroll down until I see this bed concept image. So in our project, we only have bed names on a few strata, and that's perfectly fine. I mentioned in a previous video, sometimes you need bed names, sometimes you don't. Using this drill hole as an example, we're going to understand what the 4 different groups for beds are. So in this drill hole, I have shale coal and repeating right on down the line. They all have the same bed name, and the key status changes based on if it's coal or not. Now when I process beds, I no longer see individual coal and shale layers. I would just see these 4 groups. All of the key material, all the coal, gets lumped into this key group. All of the parting material, meaning all the non-key material that's actually sandwiched between key material, that goes into the parting group. All the non-key material at the top of the bed, that's not actually sandwiched between key material, goes into this overburden group, and all the non-key material at the bottom of the bed goes into this bottom group. Now when this happens, we respect the thicknesses of the samples, but because we have to group them together, we no longer honor the individual elevations. So this sample of coal has a top and a bottom elevation, this sample of coal has a bottom and top elevation. But because we're reorganizing things into groups, we don't really trust those elevations anymore. Now the overall top and bottom elevations for the bed, those are still going to be correct. So the top of this overburden group and the bottom of this bottom group, those elevations are still going to be correct, and the overall thickness is still going to be correct. But because we're adding things into these groups, it really changes the visual appearance of the drill holes. So oftentimes when I'm drawing the drill holes, I often like to draw just the strata in the hole. And then if I actually have to model and correlate between holes, that's when I might show the beds, the way they're actually going to be modeled in the geologic model. So that's just a big difference between drawing strata and drawing beds, but understanding that strata bed concept is going to be very important to keep in mind when we're actually building a geologic model. So the last thing that I'm going to do here is just add some labels to the drill holes, just so I know that's drill hole number 1, what the surface elevation is, things like that. Not always necessary, but certainly very helpful when we're trying to explore the data. Now, there's actually 2 commands here for this, found under Draw Drill Hole Text. We have the standard drill hole text, which is not as flexible, but quick to use. And then we have the drill hole text formatter. Gives you a lot more options, but takes a bit longer to set up the first time. I'm just going to show the standard drill hole text first. And with this one, you can see we've got all the options laid out for us. We just pick what we want to draw and hit OK. Now most of the time when I do this, I'm going to put my text on the same layer as the drill hole. So if this is on the drill hole 1 layer, that's what I want to use. So I really like using that option. For the text size, I'm going to stick with the default to 50. We can resize that if needed. And then for all these checkboxes, I just turn on what I want to see. So if I'm interested in the drill hole name, the elevation, coordinates, just turn those things on. Most of the time, I end up just drawing the drill hole name. So everything else up here is turned off. The next few options are focused on the strata information. So if I wanted to see the strata elevations, the strata thicknesses, the strata depths, I could do that, but I'm going to leave all those turned off. I'm just going to be drawing the drill hole name, but this text offset is going to control how high above the symbol that label is going to go. Usually I like that to be half of the drill hole size. My drill holes are currently sized at 50. That's controlled in another setting, a different file that we haven't defined that I'm not going to get into, but a 50 is going to be the default for your symbol sizes. So a text offset of 25, that'll just ensure that the text doesn't get drawn right on top of the symbol. So I'll stick with 25 and leave that as is. Strata to include, I'll just say all, even though I'm not actually going to be labeling anything. The text alignment, I want to put this label above the symbol. And all the other options on here, I'm just going to ignore those for now and leave those turned off. So I'll click OK. I'll pick the drill holes that I want to label. I don't want to put any of these attributes on here. And just very simply shows me that's drill hole C4, that's C2. Pretty easy to work with. Now the next command I'll show is the more complex one. It's going to give us a lot more flexibility as far as what we're going to draw on this drill hole. So I'll start this up. So I'll pick the drill holes that I want to label. This one does it in a little different order. This time we have to pick the holes before we pick our settings. I'm asked if I want to process the beds. I'm going to say no to that. I'm just focused on the individual strata layers. Now this is a very different format of a dialog. So here I can pick the groups. So if I'm looking at the drill hole labels as a whole, these are all the individual things that I could label. So I can get a lot more exact with what I actually add for this label. So as an example, I might want to see the drill hole elevation. I can pick the layer that I want to put it on. I'll stick with that core text label, or core text layer, that's fine. For the color, I'm still a big fan of using the by layer option. And here I can enter in headers, a prefix, a suffix, really however I want to change it up. For the text size, I'll stick with a 10. And this one I want to put below the drill hole in row number 1. So I've got a lot of options just where I put that single label. It's not all picked for me. Similarly, I might want to see the overburden thickness. A lot of the same options there. I might just mention the overburden thickness. But this one I'm going to put on row number 2. And I could keep on picking additional things if I wanted to. There's just a lot of flexibility in here. I won't do much more with this command, but just know that this gives you a lot of flexibility to customize these labels how you want to see them. And I'm going to click OK. And there we can see the labels have been added in for us. Let me go ahead and turn off that core mark layer. Okay, so now we've customized the layers, customized the labels how we want to see them, and we've got just a lot of good options there for labeling the drill holes as we want them.